what I want to do now is introduce them. We're going to have a little tea and coffee break after the next speaker, so you'll all be hoping there probably won't be too long. And because the social side is important and for people to chat and so on, and then we'll resume. But I want to introduce our minister here, who wants to talk about, well, what lessons does Michael Collins teach us for now and the future? So I know well, Dinny McGinley, Minister for the Gaeltacht.
Thank you very much, Tom. And listening to Niall McGinley there, I felt, I was living through a lesson in living history. And he spoke of his father, a great man, a great patriot, and a great servant to the people of Donegal. And I had a first-hand encounter with your father, and came through the ordeal and lived to tell the tale. It had nothing to do with what we are here tonight about, but he removed my tonsils.
You didn't get a bullet or anything?
Not quite. And delighted, and I want to compliment the Collins 22 Society for giving us the opportunity of having this meeting here in Letterkenny tonight. And I don't want to start off on a discordant note. I know that there are many people here. Obviously you're all interested in Michael Collins. You may be of different persuasions in other areas. But I would like to recall a little story, a little incident that happened where Joe McHugh and I worked, and others before us, in Dáil. I'm just going to tell the story to just show how things have changed. In 1969, in April 1969, there was a ferocious row in Dáil. Probably it wasn't the first row, and it certainly won't be the last. It had to do with a book that was published by the Department of Foreign Affairs, or External Affairs as they were known at that time. And the name of that book was Facts About Ireland. Many chapters in that book I had in my hand yesterday, Thursday, in the Dáil. Many pictures, chapters, different aspects of Irish life and history, and it came to the political history of the country then, and there was a representation there of Cuchulainn, and there was a representation there as well of Brian Boru and other great warriors. There was one there of Wolfe Tone, Daniel O'Connell, Michael Davitt, who has already been mentioned here tonight, and Charles Stewart Parnell. There was a portrait there of Padraig Pearse, and also one of Eamon de Valera. But there was one name and one portrait that was not there. And it was raised in the Dáil, why was Michael Collins not in that book? That was government publication, and it was said at the time that he wasn't there because he just played a minor role in the War of Independence. That was 1969. And I just told that story to show how things and our perception of Michael Collins has changed in the meantime. Not alone is he a great hero to the Fine Gael party, the founder of our party. He is revered also by members of the Fianna Fáil party, the Labour party, other parties, even Sinn Féin recognise his contribution to what we have in this country. And what happened in '69 was not an accurate reflection of how Collins was seen by his own contemporaries. A leading anti-treaty Republican, Tom Barry, Munster, guerrilla leader, former veteran of the First World War, and so on, in a television interview recalled a remarkable scene. It was 1922, the Civil War was raging. Barry, like other Republicans, was a prisoner in Kilmainham jail. Barry was in one of the cells at the top of the landing with Oscar Traynor, another great man who contributed to the independence of this country, when in his words, that's Barry's words, we heard the hubbub outside. We walked out onto the landing, didn't walk out of jail, we walked out onto the landing. I looked down, he says, and saw a most remarkable sight. There were about 700 or 800 men there, all down on their knees, and they saying the rosary for the repose of the soul of Michael Collins. One time he was their leader against the British. Then he was commander-in-chief of the enemy forces, the established government. Barry's words, in my opinion, show the influence, respect, and for many, the hero worship that Collins earned during the fight for independence. Even his opponents were heartbroken and grieving for his death at Ballinablaw. The hero worship Collins attracted wasn't simply because he embodied the new republic, young, charismatic, and passionate. History suggests that there was no one more important in the War of Independence than Michael Collins. We all know the history of Irish rebellions. They were usually short, very often ineffective, but the War of Independence was different, however. It is remembered as a war that brought the great British Empire to the negotiating table and ended British rule on most of this island. Much of that, in my opinion, was down to the work of Michael Collins. That comment is not meant to diminish in any way the contribution of others. There were many, many great figures who played key roles. It is simply to highlight just how crucial Collins was, for no one else was so directly involved in every key area with his decisions, the difference between success and failure. His fundraising, as already been mentioned, funded the War of Independence, the First and the Second Dáil, international lobbying, the propaganda machine. It made the Irish Republic not just a slogan, but a reality in the eyes and experience of many. His spy network fatally undermined what had been Britain's trump card, its informers and spies in all past rebellions. His administrative skills made the Republic a functioning reality, while his common sense and realism tempered the more unrealistic ideas of others in the leadership. He kept the leadership's feet on the ground and, if I may say so, guns in their hands and money in their pockets. That is perhaps why Republicans mourn Collins, the memory of Collins. They recognise that he was at the heart of everything the revolution achieved. As this country prepares to leave the bailout and regain control of our finances, it is appropriate to remember Collins' role as Minister of Finance. It may have been less glamorous than being Spy Master-in-Chief, but in many ways the war could not have happened without it. It is believed that his fundraising raised a massive 1.370 million, 1 million of it incidentally in the United States. That was equivalent to 44 million euros in today's currency. A colossal sum, considering it was raised by a small group of fundraisers starting off with nothing, all of whom were on the run and members of an illegal Dáil, and in the face of the might of the world's biggest empire. That money enabled the Dáil to function, enabled the new republic to send ambassadors to seek international recognition, and enabled its widely praised propaganda team to challenge the British spin in the media. It armed the army of the Republic. It enabled the takeover of local government system by the Dáil. It enabled the running of an independent court service. Without that money, there would have been no arms for flying columns to use, no government for Eamon de Valera to lead, no local government system for Cosgrave to control as he did, no resources for Desmond Fitzgerald and others to mount their successful propaganda campaign. The fundraising was so successful and drew so much international amazement that Lenin, from the new Russian Republic, asked for and got a loan of some money from the fledgling Irish Republic, giving us some of the old Russian crown jewels as collateral. And if I'm not mistaken, those crown jewels were to be found in the vaults of Dublin Castle until comparatively recently. There may be others here who may know more about that than I do, but I know that they did rest there for a number of generations. Collins's counter-espionage role is much more widely known. For years, the ability of the British to had given them a key advantage. So he decided to trump the British at their own game. The top secret spy reports being supplied to the Dublin Metropolitan Police and Republicans were being read by Ned Broy and passed on to Collins. And you all heard, and some of you probably did read, The Spy in the Castle. Dave Nelligan ended up with the Irish Free State Army afterwards, and the name Nelligan may be familiar to some of you who may have had occasion to go to one of the top clinics in Dublin, Maurice Nelligan, who performed the first heart bypass in this country and who passed away suddenly, was the nephew of that same Dave Nelligan. And I had the pleasure and the privilege of having a meal with Dave Nelligan many, many years ago when he was in UCD and addressed one of our historical society meetings. In effect, Collins was spying on the British spies and using Britain's own records to find out the identity of British spies in the Republican movement. There was much more to Collins, but perhaps his greatest characteristic was his realism. Some in the Republican movement were so devoted to unrealistic goals that they risked not achieving what actually was achievable. They lived in a fantasy world that had little to do with the war or with the real Ireland of the 1920s. Collins was the voice of sanity, the voice of reality. The man who could tell reality from fantasy. That put him at odds with the President de Valera. Another brilliant man, but whose ideas, such as the disastrous attack at the Customs House that nearly wiped out the IRA in Dublin, as it left them exposed in public view and led to their arrest, were rarely tempered by practical realities and sometimes caused problems rather than solving them. That sense of realism led Collins to endorse the treaty, not because it gave him all he wanted, but because he knew that the Irish at that time could not get more, and if the war was continued, they would end up later on with a worse deal because the army, and he knew the army was exhausted, and the supply of munitions was drying up. He did what he believed was the best deal possible in the circumstances, even though he knew it would cost him his life. We all know his comments to one of the signatories of the British side that he was signing his. Far too many did not grasp the fact that the pristine republic they wanted to achieve was beyond the means of the old IRA to deliver at that time. Collins realised different tactics would be needed to get the republic. He said the treaty, he saw the treaty rather, as freedom to achieve freedom, to bank the gains made and then build on them. So friends, what lessons does the story of Collins give us in 2013? First of all, it shows how individuals can make a difference, even against a supposedly unbeatable opponent, if they have the skills, passion, commitment, and determination, as Collins had. Secondly, it shows the importance of being practical. Although through Collins's life, he kept a strong grasp on reality. He did not become so blinded by fanciful dreams and fanaticism that he had lost a sense of the possible. He wrote to Desmond Fitzgerald, the father of Garrett Fitzgerald, in 1922, of his vision for Ireland, the Ireland he hoped to achieve. And I quote, "What we must aim at is the building of a sound economic life in which great discrepancies cannot occur. We must not have destitution or poverty at one end, and at the other an excess of riches in the possession of a few individuals, beyond what they can spend with satisfaction and justification. The growing wealth of Ireland will, we hope, be diffused through all our people, all sharing in the growing prosperity, each receiving what each contributes in the making of that prosperity, so that the wealth of all is ensured." End of quote. It simply means that we all must have a vision that is doable, that is possible, that is achievable and real, and commit ourselves fully and totally to the service of our people and our country, just as Michael Collins, so many others of that generation did. We owe that to his memory and to Ireland. I think it was Niall, in conclusion, I think it was Niall again, who mentioned the handover of power in 22 in Dublin Castle, with the Viceroy there, the King's representative in Ireland, and the story is told, Niall, that Collins was 10 minutes late for the handover. The Viceroy said to him, "You've kept us waiting 10 minutes. And Collins said, "You kept us waiting 700 years. Can you imagine?
Thank you very much, Dinny. Certainly, we can draw a number of conclusions from that, and I'm going to leave those conclusions to you to draw. We're going to have a break now for tea and coffee, and then we'll resume. And one of the things I'm looking forward to in the second half of this is hearing the likes of John and others who coming from a different perspective on Michael Collins. Because I always find, when I look at Irish history, I always feel uncomfortable. Because sometimes history tells us a lot about ourselves and whether we, and for example, if you look at one of the things that has shocked me has been about the Magdalen laundries. And I've asked my other family members, because my kids have asked me, well, do you remember any of those places? And I can say, no, I don't, because I never heard them mentioned. And you wonder why, and you live through history, and you don't notice, and you don't observe, and you don't take it in. And I think the lesson for us, let's, in living through the time now, and this is a real crisis in Irish society, we don't let it go over our heads without learning from it and observing and acknowledging the good and the bad. There are some of the things that this type of night can teach us. So we're going to tea and coffee now. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.